Welcome back to our special series from Sales Process 360. I'm your guest host, Lindsay Young, president of Three Aspens Media. Welcome to episode 4 of our series on the CEO for CRM. How's it going, Brian?
It's going well, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
Today, we're going to talk about the CRM build, which, as we've discussed before, is informed by the statement of work and done in phases, starting with phase 1. So, Brian, you like to say that when you start with the actual implementation, that you need to start with the end in mind. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
I mean, as it stays the end in mind, what's that end? It's what do you want to get out of CRM? Know what you want to get out of CRM, which will then, you start with the end and you drive forward with the build, as we're talking about here, drives the design and the build. Example of some of that. We know that we need to report by industry or region. Well, if that's the end in mind, something you want to focus on in the end, then you got to build the system to be able to report on that. Or you want to report or forecast by certain product families or certain business units, then you need to build a system such that you'll be able to get that end result. You want to do targeted marketing by a business unit, then you've got to build the contacts and you got to build the business unit tables in the system. So it's thinking of the end will help you drive the design and build, basically. And it's so important because, it's like building a house. You've got the foundation, then you've got the walls and, all the electrical and everything else. There's a process for that. Well, the same thing with building a CRM. There's a process, but you got to think about what the end is. Just like your house, you've got a picture of, you've got the blueprint of what the end looks like, and then you have to build to it.
Makes sense. So part of this is driven by the day in the life scripts, and we talked about those on the last episode. So how do the day in the life scripts work into, or how do they inform the build?
Yeah, this all is tying together, right? It's basically the roadmap. It's your roadmap to building the system. So you take these scripts and you build out. Example, after a sales call, you want to log key information and the products discussed. Well, you've got to build the system to be able to manage that with the product taxonomy tables and all of that. So it's the example, you want to link multiple products or services to an opportunity. Well, you're going to need to build the opportunity to have opportunity lines. So you can have multiple products or services to that opportunity. You need to manage initiatives. Well, you've got to decide whether you're going to use an existing object or build its own object. And you got to then build toward that. So again, these scripts are they touch everything. Like I think I said in the last episode, we talked about it feeds off of each other as you work through the CRM journey. And during the build stage, again, those scripts are vital to making sure that you build the CRM properly.
That's great. So what does, and this might get a little technical, but what does the actual build typically look like for someone who has not been through this process? I know you've mentioned sprints before, for example. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, no, good question. And it is, I'll try to break it down into, simple steps here. But yeah, sprints are typically used. And what is a sprint? A sprint is a phase. We talk about phases, and I'll think of sprints as phases to what you want to do. So you have these sprints and an agile approach. And what I mean by that is you build the system out using the day in life scripts via these sprints, and you test as you go. Another thing that typically is used, or you'll hear in the CRM world when building out CRM, is what's called epics and stories. So epics and stories, it's kind of the day in the life. It's the stories, or think of stories as day in the life. So epic, so here's an example. An epic might be, we want to do opportunity management. Part of CRM, we want to do opportunity management. Okay, that's the epic. Well, then there's stories. There's multiple stories that you'll need to do in CRM to be able to do opportunity management. And so you build out these stories, or kind of the children to the epics, and you kind of piece the puzzle. Think about building a puzzle, putting a puzzle together. And so it's basically putting this puzzle together. So you start with the end in mind. You have these day in the life scripts that will drive the daily activity that ultimately ends in the result that you want. But to build the system, you've got to create these epics and stories. And then there's And again, epics will have many stories. Like I said, there'll be multiple stories as children to the epics. Another thing that's used in building out CRM is what's called objects. And so think of CRM as objects. An example of objects: accounts are objects, contacts are objects, opportunities are objects, quotes are objects, activities are objects. These are the building blocks that you need to build. And when you start building out these objects, you've got to get down to the level of what fields do you want on these objects? What are the processes that you need, the process flows for these objects? So it can, you just break it down. I mean, I know that sounds like a lot of work, and at the end of the day, it is a lot of work. But if you break it down into these sprints with these stories and these epics and stories, and to take every object and figure out what are the key fields and what are the key processes, it's manageable, but it takes time, and that's what's key to building out. You just can't go into it and say, hey, we want a CRM system. Well, what does that mean? You've got to really break it down.
And how much of what you just described is the responsibility of the vendor or partner, and how much of it does the CEO for CRM and stakeholders need to understand and be a part of?
Yeah, no, great question. Typically, let's start with the vendor. Let's pick at that one. Typically, the vendor is not part of that process. Typically, the vendor was involved in the front end pursuit. They handled the negotiation for pricing and contract. And then ultimately, once that's signed, it's now the partner, the CRM partner that you're going to be working with is involved. And I think we talked in the previous episode about how important that partner is. So that partner pretty much owns this. They're the project manager for this. Your stakeholders, your CEO for CRM needs to make sure that the team, that they as CEO for CRM and the team are aligned with the partner and building this out, that we know what the end in mind, we sign off on the end in mind, and then we go backwards and start building out the system to ultimately get the end result that we're looking for. So stakeholders are heavily involved. Super users, I think I've mentioned in past episodes, super users are key. Those are the actual users that will be helping to test the system and ultimately be the champions as we roll this out by role. So basically, the partner and the stakeholder super users are doing the heavy lifting, with the CEO for CRM kind of overseeing that and making sure that everyone's moving in the right direction.
So let's talk about, maybe, because this is a really big topic and we're not going to cover everything. So let's talk about maybe a few of the important things to get right. And one of the things that comes immediately to mind for me is data structure and data planning, and the importance of that. So maybe we could start there.
Yep. And it is a big topic. This is a big topic. Very big topic, and especially if we're talking CRM to ERP integration. But let's just talk at first about accounts. In my mind, the account or customer record is the highest in the food chain, because all the other objects or things are linked to that account: contacts, activities, quotes, opportunities, all of that. So the account needs to be in place, the data structure for account. And this is a big topic, and especially if we're talking ERP integration, which is the holy grail, right? The account the master should be the ERP feeding the CRM for accounts, but then you've got prospects. So you got to go through that whole prospect management. You're going to manage the prospect in CRM. You don't want to turn it into a customer until they're truly a customer. So you got to work through that data structure and that process. But a big one for accounts, and I'm actually working with a client right now on this, and that is how do I describe this? What most companies in the industrial market call sites. That's physical sites for an account. So there might be an account. I'll give you an example. Exxon or Shell is the account. And you've got the sold to with the billing and all that, and there's ship tos, but the account is Shell. Well, but Shell might have 5, 10, 15 sites, physical locations. And I'm not talking ship to locations. I'm talking true locations of, kind of where the fence is around the facility for which you can visit. And ERP, typically ERP doesn't care about sites. CRM cares about sites, because we drive all transactions off of sites. So we have to now build out that hierarchy, account hierarchy in ERP, if we're going to do integration with CRM. And it gets fairly complicated, but it's the right way to do it, I believe, because you want to drive all your transactions off that site. And those sites need to be linked to a parent sold to for a roll-up capability, meaning I want to see everything going on with Exxon, but specifically I want to see everything going on with the specific sites of Exxon. We need the capability to do that, so you got to build that hierarchy or data structure around that. So That's that one. The next big topic for data structure is product taxonomy needs. And again, different needs for ERP versus CRM. Typically, ERP, if I'm dealing with an industrial distributor, they have the manufacturer set up in their ERP, and the manufacturer has models or SKUs or part numbers that they have. Well, there's a middle layer there of like second level product families, let's say, or product groups that CRM needs. So now we have to build that data structure to accommodate the CRM needs. So those are two, Lindsay, those are two very, very big rocks, so to speak, that have to be addressed when implementing a CRM, and especially if you're talking about ultimately linking your CRM to your ERP. I know I said a lot there. It is a very it's a hot topic and a very complex topic.
But what happens if you, going back as an example to the account data structure, and what happens, you're talking about the sites versus just the bill to, like, ERP doesn't care about necessarily the sites, the CRM does. So making sure you have that all structured correctly. If you didn't do that, what would be the pain point that they would experience?
Well, the pain point is, which they ultimately probably want, back to that thinking of the end in mind, right? That original question, the opening question. If they don't do that right, they're not going to get what I call not only myself, others call an account 360 view of the account, a 360-degree view of the account inside of CRM. They're not going to get that back-end data structured properly to land on the right account or site in CRM. Quotes and orders, let's say. Typically, quotes and orders are done on the back-end side or on your ERP side. So if that structure is not built right and that hierarchy is not built correctly, then you're probably not going to get an accurate 360 view of the business from the account perspective or site perspective.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah, it could be a topic of its own. Typically, needing a whiteboard to draw it out because it's a big topic.
How much of your time when you're working with clients do you feel like you spend on the data question, the data structure piece?
In the beginning, a lot. It's the foundation. It's the foundation to get this right. We must get this right. We must get product taxonomy right. The data structure for the product taxonomy, because that touches everything. It touches all objects. It touches the account object for white space and all, for white space on accounts. It touches obviously op-line down to the product level needed for taxonomy at the op-line. It touches contact, linking what products certain contacts are interested in. So it's involved for marketing, be able to do detailed marketing campaigns to some level of taxonomy. So it just touches everything. And it's a big topic in the beginning. We spend a lot of time on it.
The other piece of that is data governance, which you alluded to, but what does that mean? And do you put then a structure into place, like a set of rules to keep things in line?
Yeah. Let's take it to high level. I'm not, if you can avoid at all costs, avoid text fields. Because everyone has their, whatever they want to put in that text field. Again, a company name. Is it all caps? Do you do CO or do you do company and all of those things, right? Do you do LLC? So when there's text fields, you got to be very specific on the data governance on what's the standard for input. A lot of CRMs might be, some CRMs, I say a lot, I'm sorry. Some CRMs might allow you to maybe put some rules on that with some logic behind the scenes. So text fields are the worst for that, right? Just open text fields. Try to build a system with standards and pull downs with selections, either single selections or multi selections for data. Why? A, can't make a mistake, so to speak, or spell it wrong, and B, it will help you for reporting later. Meaning, if I wanted to report on a text field, I got to think about all the combinations for which someone might have put in that text field. And the combinations of how they spelled it or what they put in there. Where if you have selection fields, it makes that much easier. Then another thing you can do, that's another thing as far as data fields, governance for things, is making fields mandatory. A lot of times we'll go into the system and we'll drive mandatory fields. Now, users don't like that in the beginning because it forces them to maybe fill out more fields than they want to, on maybe an account, let's say, where you got to fill out segmentation or region or industry or whatever, and you make those fields mandatory. But what you'll do is you'll now start creating standards and again, have data that you can then report on and so mandatory fields is another good thing to think about when you're building out that for data governance.
Well, related, but slightly separate topic, integration, another important thing to keep in mind. Can you talk to the importance of making sure your systems are integrated and which ones are the most important to make sure that they're linked up front?
Sure. Another very big, you got a lot of big topics on this call.
Throwing it all at you today.
That's integration is the holy grail. Okay. I mean, I go back to my life prior, 25 years ago when I was in industrial sales and, we couldn't even think about integration the way companies can think about it today and actually implement on it. But I still see a lot of, I would say for the companies I work with, 80% of them are not integrated between ERP and CRM. Okay.
Oh.
It's a big number. It's a big number. They want to get there, but it's a lot of work. Back to what we just said about earlier, about all the alignments with accounts and taxonomy and who's the master and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of work, but integration is a big topic. It's the holy grail. It's the 360 view of your business. It also allows you, I think if done properly, it allows you to promote to the sales team on giving them something back. So instead of them thinking that all they're doing is inputting information to CRM, if you can serve up back-end data with their inside sales and order entry team and accounting, if you can serve up data from the ERP and CRM, now you're giving them something at their fingertips, which typically it was very hard for them to get to that data quickly. Example, the quotes in my territory, the orders in my territory, the outstanding orders, the clients that are on credit hold, all the things that you're managing in ERP. If we serve that up in CRM or with integration, then you're giving something back to the sales team. Another thing for integration, you got to think about down to the object level. We talked a minute about objects. Let's talk about the account object. Is it a one-way sync or a two-way sync? Meaning, is it, and which system, the ERP or the CRM, is the master? Let's take accounts. I believe the account object, the master for integration, should be the ERP. And that needs to be managed, and it's typically a one-way sync from the ERP system down to the CRM system. But you got to think about all those things. Then you got to think about product taxonomy, the product structure that's in ERP. How does that dovetail into the CRM? Remember I said earlier, typically CRM needs another level or another layer in that product taxonomy, typically like product group or product category or product family, which ERP typically doesn't have. So you got to think about that. Typically, the ERP is the master for product taxonomy, but we got to build that middle layer. Again, as you said, Lindsay, these are big questions. These are big things that need to be thought about when implementing CRM and put a plan in place for this.
So the third important thing to keep in mind, and this kind of goes back to what you're talking about, the data being the foundation, I think, right, is dashboards by role, dashboards that actually do something for the people that are using them, the reports that you need. Can you cover that a little bit for us?
Yep. So again, all roads lead back to your opening question. What is thinking of the end in mind? Dashboards are the end in mind, in my mind. It's what do you want the output to be from CRM that, again, you can drive action and drive behavior, so to speak, with the data. So you've got to think of the end in mind, and you've got to lay these dashboards out, but you don't want to overwhelm the team. So let's back up even further. I'm going to give you a real story. So I was working recently with a client that the first thing they wanted to do was build out some dashboards for their sales team to start using because they felt it was good for them to have these dashboards. I said, I agree, but we can't build these dashboards out yet. We can lay the specification out, but we can't build it because we need to build the system, the system and the processes so we know what to filter and what fields to use in these dashboards. We might be adding new fields I'll take an example of an opportunity. How can we build a dashboard for opportunity management when we don't know all the fields and the processes that we want, and we haven't laid that out yet so we can use those fields to build the dashboards? So it's a chicken or the egg. I said we need to build the specifications for the dashboards because that's the end in mind, but you physically, I don't think, can't go build the dashboards until you finish all of the front end work of the day in the life scripts and the building the objects and all the things that you're on the build side before you can build the dashboard. So it's again, the chicken or the egg. Another thing that I've been promoting a lot lately is, again, not trying to overwhelm the users. I do believe you said a second ago, role-based. I'm a big believer that dashboard should be role-based. Outside sales, inside sales, customer service, marketing, management type dashboards. Serve the data up to them for which is valuable to them and they can drive action. We've said a lot in some other previous episodes about the one hand rule. I think that holds true here. Maybe 5 key things that you really want to serve up to start with, and then you grow dashboards as your team grows with CRM. But an area that I've been focused on is something I call past, present, and future. So I take these dashboards, let's say an outside sales dashboard, and there's a section for past. Maybe there's 3 things in the past, or no more than 5 things in the past section. What happened? Past example. Date range specific. Last week, what happened in my territory last week? Any new orders, any new contacts, any new service requests? What's important to you? You serve that up in the past. And then the next section is present. What is the present things that I need to be focused on right now to take action? What's my 30-day opportunity pipeline look like? Where are my stalled opportunities? What are the open leads that I haven't followed up on that I need to follow up on? Again, 3 to 5 present things that they need to focus on. And then you have a future. What's the future look like? Those are more big level. What's my pipeline look like, sorted by the highest dollar value, or maybe by 90 to 180 day close? What's the future look like? Another thing that I'm a big believer in dashboards is input trends. I believe serving up, whether you do it in CRM or whether you take the data and make a hyperlink to Power BI or some type of analytical tool, but I believe input trends are important to serve up in some form or fashion to the team. Input trends are your leading indicators. Am I touching and finding enough new contacts? Am I making the amount of sales calls I need to be making? Is my opportunity pipeline increasing or decreasing as far as finding new opportunities? What's my quote and trend look like? Am I quoting more or less? Those are leading indicators for the future. So again, I said a lot there. Just to summarize, think of the end in mind with dashboards. The one hand rule, think about the past, present, future, building these buckets and serving up the data that they can take action on.
That's great. So, big question, what role does the CEO for CRM play in all of this, in the build itself?
Well, they need to have their finger on the pulse. I think they also should let the stakeholders get involved with this from their roles and help them. And, the stakeholders should be driving what's needed. The CEO for CRM needs to sign off on it or make sure that the CEO for CRM understands what the stakeholders are asking the system to do with these dashboards. Ultimately, the CEO needs to sign off on that. They need to make sure the stakeholders are looking at the big picture, not just maybe from their perspective, but from the whole overall company. But they need to have their finger on the pulse and sign off on it.
Great. So I know we've talked about the difference between the CRM vendor, who's the maker of the software, versus a CRM partner. Can you talk a little bit about how communicative the vendor and the partner would be during this process?
Yeah.
Not with each other, but with the company.
Yeah. So typically, I see, like I said, that vendor right off into the sunset after the order's been signed, the contract's been signed. They were involved with the front end negotiation on pricing and terms and all of that. And then the partner steps in, rolls up their sleeves, and they're pretty much driving and managing this project going forward with the key stakeholders and the CEO for CRM and the key stakeholders at the company. So typically, now I think the vendor could be pulled back in if there's maybe some requests that are needed, or the partner's not comfortable with some things, or maybe some technology. But typically that partner's, they've been vetted, they've been certified by the vendor. And a lot of times they might even know the CRM better, the system better than the vendor salespeople do, right? So that vendor typically rides off into the sunset during the build, and the partner basically drives and manages it going forward.
Okay, so everything's set up. Next step, is actual testing and getting feedback from the user. So can you define testing for us, how it's done, why it's done, how important this is to the process?
Yep. So let's those testing data life scripts that we've been talking about. Again, they play a part in this testing because that needs to be tested to make sure that the team can do the data life expectations that's going to be required of them. So the super users that have been identified. Remember, those super users are typically users, one or two users from each role that are going to basically pressure test the system. They're going to use these day in the life scripts and stories. They're going to test in a, so let's back up even further. So the partner is building out based on these stories and based on these epics and stories and sprints, right? All the things we talked about a minute ago. They're building out the system in a dev environment, typically a development environment. And so then once they finish a sprint, let's say what the sprint is, build out the opportunity module, the functionality and processes for opportunity management. The CRM partner says, okay, we're ready to test based on the build that we built and the feedback. We're now ready to test. So now the super users get in there, they use the Dana Life scripts, and they start testing it. So it's tested in an agile environment. As you do sprints, you test so that you can fix any breaks, fixes or whatever before you go on to the next. Because a lot of times they all feed off of each other. So if we don't get that right, we're probably going to have an issue with the next sprint, right? So there needs to be a feedback process in place where the super users can test it and document any issues, but also not just issues. I think they also should document their suggestions for improvement because everything might have looked good on paper. You might have talked through the processes, these sprints, you document your stories on paper and all that. Now you go build it. Now, when you go actually using the system, it's a different world. It's now real feedback. You're in the system now. So I think you should also promote your super users during testing to also provide suggested improvement for user experience. Could we do something differently? Can I reduce the number of clicks to get to the end result? All of those things there should be a feedback mechanism for the users to give those suggestions during testing. There's a process for this, and you just need to, using that Dana Life script, you just need to test as sprints are being done, give feedback, also offer suggestions, and then keep moving the ball forward.
There are some best practices in this part of the process, right? Like you said, there's a testing script and documentation that must be done.
Must be. You can't have free reign, so to speak, or just send someone emails. Have a document. Typically, what I've seen is there's a team site or SharePoint site that's set up for all the testing feedback, such that everyone can put their feedback in one spot, put their suggestions in one spot, and then it allows you to have meetings to. Then you can serve those up to those issues to the technical team. Create tickets, right? I was involved with a client that we had these tickets that were put in they used the service tickets system that they had in place for managing CRM fixes. And then the CRM partner managed those tickets and we could see the result and when tickets were updated so we can go back in and retest. Because again, now you're going to have to go back and retest the things that were broken and make sure you didn't break anything else, right?
So the question I always like to ask is common mistakes in this process. And I think you've addressed some of those, but are there any others?
Yeah, common mistakes that I see. I guess you'd call it a mistake or maybe just they don't, a lot of times companies might not spend the time they need to on this whole testing process. I'm not putting in place a feedback to improve. I get it. The super users have a full-time job. They're doing this to help the company, in their free time, if they have any free time, but they might not put the emphasis or spend the time on the testing. It's so important to have this testing right. Why? Because this sets the stage for the initial implementation when we get ready to roll this out to the entire company. And the last thing you want is a bad first impression, right? So you want to try to break this as much as you can through everyone's ways they do things, in the system and make sure that we try to check all those boxes, so to speak. So, to your question, a common mistake, I believe, is that maybe companies don't put the emphasis or they don't believe that this is as important as it needs to be and doesn't allocate the time needed for this.
Just to kind of add on to that, because just because, and I'd love to hear if you see this misperception, just because you might be using a platform, a CRM platform that is well regarded, used by a lot of people, doesn't mean that the customization or the tailoring that you've done for your business is working as it should or working as you thought it would. Is that one of the reasons you need to prioritize this?
Yeah. And again, you've got your own processes, this just because the CRM had this capability in the CRM or had this field or had this, whatever, doesn't mean it's going to be used the same way for every company. So you've got to pressure test that. And you're not only, and here's another thing. And when we go to testing, we're thinking about, is it going to work? Well, the other parts of testing are simple as test the pull down selections. Here's a good example. Test the pull down selection. I was just involved in this earlier today. Test the pull down selections. Are they right? Are they in the order that they should be? Are they the ones that we want the users to select? When I say that, I'll use one industry. We want to select an industry for this account. Are these the industries that we want the users to select? Pulp and paper, refinery, chemical, whatever those are. So you've got in the system at every object, remember all those fields we talked about that we got to map out the fields and whether they're text fields or single selection or multi-selection, all of that needs to be tested. So that selection might work. So you might say, oh, it's passed. Well, no, we got to go deeper. Is it the fields that we want? Have we tested all the fields that are in there for that? Because that's going to drive the ability to report and slice and dice by those fields.
So, Brian, to put an even greater emphasis on this, just because you might be using a CRM platform that maybe is well regarded, used by a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work as it should or as you need it to. So testing is critical no matter what platform you're using.
No question. I mean, just the platform, out of the box, a lot of platforms have a lot of different fields and functionality, but every company uses those fields or doesn't use those fields or functionality as advertised, and that's fine. A company has to adopt their processes to the CRM and how it works for them. A good example of that is I'm working with a client right now that the CRM has an object called cases. They call it cases. Cases is kind of like the wildcard object that can be used for a lot of different things. It can be used to track RFQs, requests for quotes. It can be used for tracking service cases or service issues. It can be used for whatever. So the CRM system, built this object called cases, but again, different companies use it differently. So there's an example there. And then you talk about the fields. They have fields for things, but you've got to put your selections in that meet your requirements or pull down selections, Example, type of purposes, an activity type purpose. Well, what's the purposes? Is it to track expediting or service or RMAs, or is it to track, complaints or, every company needs to fill in their fields, their selection fields for all of these out of the box fields. So long and short is every company needs to tweak the system for their processes and their needs.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps it up for today, Brian. On our next episode, which is available now, we will be talking about how to ensure adoption and maximizing the use of your CRM after implementation, which is a critical, piece of the puzzle.
I look forward to that. I look forward to that session.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much
for
joining us.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.